African Development Bank receives approval for $1 billion exposure exchange with Asian Development Bank. Oil prices edge higher on tighter supply. Hong Kong stocks gain 3% as China vows to support for alien property market. And on the program today, issues around the ongoing Monetary Policy Committee meeting shall be our focus. The program is Business Express, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Musa Abubakar, your guide. Now let's begin by telling you that the African Development Bank, AFDB, says it has received approval from its board of directors for a significant exposure exchange of $1 billion with the Asian Development Bank. A statement on the bank's website notes that the main aim of the transaction is to provide support in unlocking additional sovereign lending headroom while reinforcing the African Development Bank's capital adequacy metrics. It marks the second exposure exchange agreement executed by the African Development Bank, with the first being with the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank Group's International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Operators in the insurance industry have said motorists are now entitled to more benefits under the new motor insurance contract. This took center stage as the industry implements the new motor insurance premiums, which took effect in 2023. The National Insurance Commission, in its revised circular, stated that third-party insurance for private motors' new premium rate is now 15,000 naira, while the claims limit is 3 million naira. Own goods third-party cover attracted 20,000 naira premium with a 5 million naira compensation. Staff bus attracted 20,000 naira premium with 3 million naira compensation. Commercial trucks general cartage attracted 100,000 naira premium with 5 million naira compensation. Special types of attracted 20,000 naira premium with 3 million naira compensation. Tricycle attracted 5,000 naira with 2 million naira compensation, while motorcycle attracted 30,000 naira with 1 million naira compensation. Now, there are indications that the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, its next Monetary Policy Committee meeting, or rather the ongoing Monetary Policy Committee meeting, is likely to raise interest rates in an effort to contain inflation. However, analysts fear that this could have a negative impact on businesses and consumers as against the expectations of the markets, in line with the recent policy reforms by the new administration for interest rates moderation. Now, to speak on the issues expected to take the front burner is the National Program Coordinator, Trade Network Initiative, Chris Kaka. You're welcome to Business Express.
Good morning, listeners. Thank you for having me here.
Okay, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank had continued to tighten monetary rates to curb inflation. But with the latest inflation rate of 22.79%, it seems like the move is not really working, is it?
Okay, thank you again. I think your observation is very correct that the policy of the government of increasing the interest rate to curb inflation is actually not working. First, let's say that rising inflation is a global trend. After the COVID, countries across the world have been grappling with high inflation rate. The case of Nigeria, why it has really not yielded much result is because, for you to fight inflation, you really need to know what is actually driving it. What is driving inflation in our context here is not that there's excess liquidity in the market and you're trying to, because what you do with inflation is, when you increase interest rate to fight inflation, what you're basically doing is that, look, you are reducing the spending powers of the people. You're also reducing the balances on their credit cards and the rest of them. And once you do that, you reduce their spending, it means you're also reducing demand. And once you reduce demand, you find that that excess demand that pushes prices upward becomes moderated. But what we have in our case at the moment is that not that there is an excessive demand, because the resource is actually not there. We have a supply side constraint. Mm-hmm. And so basically, if I have an item called X and there are 20 of us demanding for it, the moment, and there are 20 of it being supplied in the market anyway, the moment the supply of it falls short of what is demanded, you find that the number of us who demand for it begins to put pressure on that particular resources to demand for it. And so the forces of market will then begin to jack up the price, and it becomes the highest bidder is able to afford it. And that's the case we have on ground now. So you will see that the central bank using interest rate increase to fight inflation is actually not using results, because what is driving our inflation in this country is actually the supply side constraint. And until you deal with it, you will continue to increase it. But to say that the expectation of the Monetary Policy Committee outcome, there is going to be a marginal less than 0.5% increase in it, because obviously the liquidity is there, but it's not really the driving force. But they need to concentrate more resources in trying to see how we can build the productive capacity of Nigeria. Because once you are able to bring to equilibrium the demand and supply of commodity in the market, particularly when you're dealing with headline inflation, you find that inflation naturally will begin to find its way dropping down. That's my take on it.
Here's the dilemma. The president, in his inaugural speech, expressed concern over the cost of borrowing. Do you see the central bank pausing interest rate at this point? Because with the issue of tightening, I don't think there will be the cost of borrowing becomes really expensive, and people don't really get to borrow. They will hold back, and that will definitely affect economic activities. So do you see at this point in time the agenda of the president now is to encourage borrowing and things like that? So do you see them pausing?
Well, I don't expect that to happen. It's also important to actually contextualize what you mean by borrowing now. If it's borrowing for consumptions, if you actually permit that, you begin to see that the inflation you're trying to fight begins to also move forward again. Because it is when there is excess liquidity that inflation itself begins to find a reason. So I don't see them actually, if you say, like the president observed, cost of borrowing is high, you need to contextualize the borrowing. Are you borrowing for manufacturing, borrowing for production, or are you borrowing for consumption? Borrowing for consumption at the moment now, reducing the rate, is actually a no-no at the moment. What we need to do, which I think the central bank is working on, is also to see how for investment in productions, you might begin to reduce the interest rate, which is what is actually doing at the moment. The last Monetary Policy Committee did have some, for development financing, a concessional rate for them as against what you have in the other sectors of the economy. So generally, you cannot at the moment, because you are trying to curtail inflation, reduce the interest rate on borrowing for consumption, but you can actually do that for investment and for production.
But when you say for manufacturing, even when you borrow at this cost, I think it affects the cost of goods and services. Don't you think so?
Which is correct. That's the point I'm making it. Yeah. I mean, they could bring down that for investments. Okay. I don't know if you understand me, but borrowing for consumptions, you don't expect the central bank at the moment now to begin to reduce reduce interest rates for commercial banks to be able to lend. Because if you do that, or you increase the liquidity with them, because once you do that, you create a system where the commercial banks are able to lend to people for consumptions rather than lending to people for the productive sector. So what I'm saying is you could actually regulate that, reduce the interest rate for where you will have to borrow for productive ventures, so that they're able to produce and be able to sell competitively in the market.
Okay, now that investors have welcomed the forex reform by the CBN, do you agree this can really help strengthen the naira?
Well, it depends on who is actually talking. You've said investors. If it's a consumer, he will tell you the harmonization of the interest rate is actually not favorable to them. If you talk to importers, right now, import is not competitive in Nigeria because what you buy like $20, you come into Nigeria, translate it to your naira, it cannot even sell in the market because you need so much naira to be able to buy it. So what is happening at the moment depends on who is speaking and saying it's actually favorable to have a harmonized exchange rate. But having said that, it's important to also say that across the world, developed economy have always left their exchange rates to be one determined by the forces of demand and supply. Us, who played a long time with so many things, we know there were a lot of land tripping with this particular thing, but I had expected the government, rather than throwing a baby with the bathwater and saying people were collecting at the official rate, going to the black market to sell, to actually provide a mechanism to check that particular leakage, rather than saying, let us harmonize. But then we've done it now. And I can say that for investors, it's actually a good one, because right now it's actually paying off for them. People sending in remittances into this country now, diaspora remittances. A little you send is actually like huge money here, because our exchange rate is actually being depreciated. But for consumers and importers, it's not a good development. But generally for the economy, I think it's a good one, because our export now is not becoming competitive. Because what is happening is that import now, except you don't have a substitute for it, import cannot actually outsell domestic production where there is a substitute for it in the market at the moment.
The central bank had recently reduced the cash reserve ratio for merchant banks from 32.5% to 10%. What does this imply for the economy? And don't you think same should be extended to other commercial banks?
Okay, good. This is more like addressing the question you raised earlier on. So you see what the central bank has done now. Rather than leaving the monetary policy rate just for everybody like that and say, let us reduce it so that people can give out interest, they have now decided to give a concessional rate to merchant banks. And what do merchant banks do? Merchant banks specializes in commercial lendings. They are more interested in cross-border trades. And so what the central bank is trying to do is actually to promote exports and make it more competitive. If you give the same concession to commercial bank, like I said earlier, you will find that you have a policy somersault, because the interest rate will continue to rise. The inflation will continue to rise, because you see that the commercial banks have got loose cash in their hands on account of the reduction of the liquidity ratio, and you see that they're able to begin to give so much funds to people to actually throw around. So the current status we have on ground, where the merchant banks have got a concessionary rate, is actually a good one, because it also helps them to begin to see how they can actually promote exports, promote production in the country, and bring in more forex, which is actually the challenge we have at the moment now.
Okay, what do you think if this same gesture should be extended to other commercial banks?
No, that's what I'm saying. It's going to be counterproductive. You can't do that to the other commercial bank, except when you do it. Then you put a caveat to it and say, this thing is, the credit you will have to give is to a particular dedicated industry, and it must be a particular sector of the economy, like agriculture, for instance. These are areas, these are sectors that can actually bring in forex for us, and at the same time reduce the pressure we currently have on the foreign reserves that we're having at the moment, which is the challenge that we have, that is driving the depreciation of our naira, and that has also informed the central bank in saying, look, let us harmonize, because obviously the central bank cannot meet from its reserve the demand for foreign exchange. And so the best way to do about it is say, let us liberalize it and let the market force determine the exchange rates. And that's what, so saying that you want to give the same concession to commercial banks, you find yourself having to push inflation that you're trying to fight in the first place upward, rather than bringing it down.
Now with the removal of fuel subsidy, and the floating of the naira,
Yeah.
we're likely to see palliatives coming, and the cost of living allowances. Are we these things, when you factor them in, uh, are we likely to see inflation coming down soon?
Okay, I don't think so. The palliatives, I mean, there's a lot of talk about it. The current palliative we have on ground does not, it's actually most unnecessary. First, let me say this, that when the president came in, he had no other option. People are actually blaming the current president. The subsidy provision in the budget ended as of June 2023. And so beyond it, irrespective of who takes over leadership of this country, had to remove the inflation. Because if you say, let us go borrow money to begin to fund the 70 billion naira inflation, Nigerians are going to scream. If you say, let us go back to the National Assembly and seek for a supplementary budget to finance it, everybody will scream. Okay. The challenge that is that made it very difficult for Nigerians at the moment is that the government, while trying to remove the subsidy, at the same time had to actually play around with the exchange rate, the harmonization of the exchange rate, while at the same time removing the subsidy is actually a problem for us. So what we have now is, as the naira continues to depreciate, because we don't produce oil, we import it, you find that as it depreciates, the cost of buying diesel, the cost of buying fuel at the open market will continue to rise because they are importing these things in the first instance. And so we would have expected the removal of subsidy is okay, but then it should not have come with the twin problem of having to harmonize the interest rate. You would have had the importers having to buy at that concessional exchange rate, which would have made things much more better for us. But will it affect, I mean, the social intervention, the palliatives we have at the moment, I mean, what can 1,000 naira do to a poor family? It cannot even buy any one of them food for 2 days. I think it's wrong. What we need to do, my take now, is the 70 billion naira we're actually using paying subsidy. Can we say, look, Nigerians will go through a tough time now, but then this money we would have used to pay for subsidy, which was going into wrong hands. Because like the former Minister of Finance, Okonjo-Iweala, now working in the World Bank, said, that there were people who did not import oil into this country and they were going, filling forms and demanding for subsidy from the federal government. That was a challenge we had. So in the absence of you blocking that leakage, they have decided to remove it totally. And the removal also meant that, look, everybody now will begin to buy things at a high cost. But then my way out of it is we need to find something to do, devote that particular resources and say, this is what we want to do with it. So that Nigerians can tomorrow point at this and tell their children, look, we had to suffer for us to be able to do X, Y, Z. And it must be something that will be enduring. Something people can tomorrow say, I took this pain to have this. But then to remove it and we don't know where you're putting the money at the moment is actually like diverting the corruption from the subsidy to another hand, and then it will be business as usual.
Okay, how do you see the Monetary Policy Committee navigating through by taming inflation without inflicting harm on growth?
Without
inflicting harm on growth, economic growth?
No, you know what is really happening at the moment? Yes, I did tell you, I'm actually making that prediction that they're going to increase it by less than 0.5%. They will definitely do that. But then we will need to address the supply side constraint. I mean, for instance, the fuel is actually expensive now. It doesn't mean that the fuel is not available or that there's an excessive demand of it. No. It is because our refineries are not working. So if you look at headline inflation, it is moving. Headline inflation that actually deals with issues of consumer price index, energy price index, it is rising not because there is excessive demand on it. It is rising because the production of it itself, the supply to the market is actually a challenge in the first instance. And so if you can deal with that, fix your refineries, you find that the energy price will actually drop in the first place. And that's the way I see us having to address this particular issue. And I expect the central bank to also understand that. But then you must understand that the central bank decisions, the Monetary Policy Committee decisions are functions of votes. Members have to vote and decide on issues. And they are not looking at the local context alone. They are looking at the international environment. The US Foreign Reserve now have said, look, let us stay the situation as it is. And I also expect the central bank to say, look, let's keep all rates where they are. Let us even do a rethink and see what has been the impact of what we have actually put in place before now. Is it yielding the kind of result we want? Then decide to, if you need to move forward. So we need to sit back, maintain all the rates, which I think they will do. If at all they will increase any, it will be marginally. And that's what I see as the outcome of the Monetary Policy Committee report that is actually going on at the moment.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris Kaka. It's always a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, moving on, how much is the Naira exchanging for other currencies? Let's find out. Let's now take a trip to the global commodities market. The federal government takes steps to mitigate the impact of petrol subsidy removal on Nigerians. The World Bank has expressed confidence in the capacity of the states to deliver targeted assistance to the most vulnerable segments of the society using the Nigeria COVID-19 Action Recovery and Economic Stimulus Platform.
Now that there are increase in prices, there are now that food has started costing more, transportation has started costing more, everybody is feeling the pinch. You can be sure that it is the poor and vulnerable that will feel it more. In fact, those who are even not poor before are likely to now fall into that basket, and they needed to be supported. So the state level, the local government level clearly seems to be the best place where that can happen. And I think the structures that the states have currently that they are using for NG cares can actually help them to do so.
So the removal of fuel subsidy and the palliative that are coming in the wake of it are some shock responsive mechanism that the NG care structures, being state government structures, have capacity to manage, while the federal government will continue to retain its monitoring and oversight responsibility over how the funds are being disbursed.
Now to the capital market. There's a positive close for investors at the end of the first weekday of trading on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The all-share index climbed 0.41% at 65,268.28 basis points as investors gained 144.2 billion naira. A total of 831.5 million shares in 9,768 deals valued at 12.9 billion naira were traded. Yesterday's data shows 8% improvement in volume, 9% decline in turnover, but 10% improvement in deals. The current market capitalization of the Nigerian Stock Exchange is 35.5 trillion naira. Meanwhile, the naira at the INE foreign exchange window yesterday advanced by 1.83% to close at 792 naira 4 kobo to a US dollar, while the NAFEX declined by 2.51% to close at $772 35 kobo to a US dollar. Next is global stocks update.
European markets were muted Tuesday as investors assessed economic data and corporate earnings, while gearing up for a big week of central bank meetings. Both Germany's DAX and CAC 40 France declined 0.23%, while the UK's FTSE rose 0.08%. In Asia, Hong Kong stocks saw a strong rebound and the Hang Seng Index climbed over 4% on Tuesday. Mainland Chinese stocks were also all higher, with the Shanghai Composite climbing over 2%. However, in Japan, the Nikkei 225 fell marginally to end at 32,682.51. U.S. stock futures were flat early Tuesday morning after the Dow Jones Industrial Average registered its longest winning streak since February 2017. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 23 points and the Nasdaq Composite rose 0.14%, while the S&P 500 was flat. African markets opened in mixed territory this Tuesday.
Thank you, Neka. This is where we end this edition of Business Express. We value your feedback, so keep the comments, observations, and suggestions coming. Be informed that all previous episodes are available on YouTube on the NTA's channel. Business Express returns Wednesday at 3 p.m. I am Musa Bakari. Enjoy the rest of your day.